The world's greatest mysteries of science and history. You're watching the MHS Network.
Hey, what's up, YouTube? Welcome to another episode of MHS Network. My name is Coleman.
I'm Hayden.
And today we have, I believe he's our first ever guest to ever return to the show, Drew Beeson. He's a true crime expert on cases such as the Zodiac killer case, the Dan Cooper case, and also the Yuba County 5, case as well, which is what we're going to talk about today. Drew, go ahead and introduce yourself and tell viewers who maybe aren't familiar with the work a little bit about yourself.
Sure, man. Thanks for having me on again. Really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun doing the last show. Well, like you said, I'm a true crime writer. Been doing it probably just about a couple years now. It's not my day job, but I would love it if it was. But what I really gravitate to is unsolved cases, unsolved cold cases. Like when I came on last time, we did the Zodiac killer. That's one of my favorites. I wrote a book about that, a person of interest book, and it's really gaining steam. Even now, it's even more and more. I'd say every week, going and hope in my direction on that. Another case I love a lot was DB Cooper, of course, the guy that jumped out of the airplane in 1971 with $200,000 and $20 bills strapped to his body when he jumped out of a Boeing 727. I've always loved that case. Just the classic American unsolved cases. So, when it comes to the Yuba County 5, as you mentioned, that one, I never had heard of that case till I just ran across it on YouTube. Like so many other people, there was one video done by a guy in England. It was called "The Boys from Yuba City," and technically they weren't from Yuba City, but they were from the area. But it was a great video nonetheless, and it just fascinated me. And I wanted to learn everything I could about this missing persons case that happened in 1978 in Yuba County, California. So I dug in with everything I had to find out everything that there was about this case.
Right. So let me ask you, Drew. So, to be honest with you, I remember when we were talking about, having you back on the show. And I know we initially talked about doing like John Benet Ramsey possibly, and then we threw out some other ideas. I knew you wrote a book on this subject, but I was never too familiar with this case. I've just never heard of it until, we brought it up. So, and thankfully we did, because it's a very interesting case. But for people in the similar situation that I was in, where, they're just maybe, let's say they haven't really heard of this case, maybe they haven't heard all the details. Could you just briefly go through the main events and the main just kind of synopsis of what this case is all about, what occurred?
Sure. Often you'll hear of this case. It's sometimes called the American Dyatlov Pass incident. And you probably heard of the Dyatlov Pass incident. And that's where in 1959, 9 Russian hikers went missing in the Ural Mountains. And, they never, under really weird circumstances. And that's a really famous case. There's been several books written about that case. And sold thousands and thousands, and probably maybe even a million copies of that particular story. But this case of the Yuba County 5 is considered the American Dyatlov Pass. I mean, there are some similarities. And this case happens in February of 1978 in Yuba County, California. And it starts, it's about 5 guys, hence the name Yuba County 5. And they were all friends. 4 of the guys in the Yuba County 5, and they had intellectual disabilities that they were born with, and that's kind of how they became friends and got to know each other. The 5th member, a guy named Gary Mathias, did not have intellectual disabilities, but he was a diagnosed schizophrenic. So kind of made an odd bunch. And they were known locally as just the boys, and that was a term of endearment towards them, mainly because they had disabilities, and they were just very sweet, would be a way to refer to them. One of the boys, his name was Ted Weir, and Ted would always wave to people, and he'd get really upset when people didn't wave back at him. One of the boys, his name was Jackie Hewitt, and Jackie Hewitt probably had an IQ of about 48, so he was really very, very slow. He couldn't read, he couldn't write, he couldn't use a telephone. And one of the boys, his name was Jack Madruga. He went by the nickname Doc, and he was the least affected of the 4 that had intellectual disabilities. He had a driver's license. He was in the military. He went over to Vietnam. He didn't see combat, but he drove a truck, but he was able to get into the army. And according to Doc's family, he was really just really shy, so he wasn't that bad off. So you kind of have the whole level. You have 4 guys that are like kind of differ in range with their intellectual disabilities. And then it rounds out with Gary, who was a diagnosed schizophrenic, and he also had drug use problems in his past. So it makes a really interesting group. And these guys came to know each other through a rehabilitation place for young men. It was called the Gateway Projects out of Yuba City. And there they would get, training on how to do different jobs and things like that. And they would just kind of look after them and just kind of, give them some guidance. And it was really great, especially for the four guys that had intellectual disabilities, because it taught them trades and things like that. And that's how they all became friends. And they had a basketball team that they had there called the Gateway Gators, and they would play in a Special Olympics basketball league. And that was their love. That's the love of all five of these guys actually was basketball. They loved it, and they all played on their team together, and they were good. They were really good, very athletic. So Gary winds up meeting the boys. The other four are already friends, and Gary winds up coming into the group about 8 months before they wind up eventually disappearing on February 24th, 1978. So Gary shows up to the Gateway Projects really just for some counseling for his drug use. And the counselor says, "Hey, I want you to help me with these other four guys. They play basketball. I know you played football in high school and you're pretty athletic. Maybe you can kind of help some of the slower ones like Jackie Hewitt." And he said, "Sure, sounds like a good idea." So that's how Gary meets up with the other four boys, and then they become the Yuba County Five. So these guys are really excited about playing in a tournament for the Special Olympics, and it's going to be held on February 25th of 1978. And if they win this tournament, they're going to get a free trip to Los Angeles. They're going to meet Sally Struthers of All in the Family fame, which was a big deal back then. And they're very excited about this game. And they have their uniforms laid out. They keep telling their mothers all week. All these guys lived at home, by the way, even Gary Mathias. All five of them lived at home with their parents. And I think one case it was with a mother and a grandmother. But they all lived at home. They couldn't take care of themselves fully at all. Gary could, but he was still living at home. But the other four definitely could not take care of themselves. So they were still living at home. And they ranged in ages from 24 up to 31 years old, and they're still living at home. But they still did things. They still went to different things and basketball practice in Sacramento. So the day before they were going to have their big game that they were going to play in, really excited about, they had another big night planned, like very Friday night of February 24th. 1978, and they were going to go see their favorite basketball team, which was the UC Davis Aggies, and they were going to go play Chico State in a road game. And they were extremely excited about this because they loved the UC Davis team. They knew every stat about every player. They knew all the names of all the players, and this was a rare chance for them to go see them play that wasn't too far from their home on a road game up in Chico, California. So the guy, Jack Madruga, is going to drive that evening. He's driving his 1969 Mercury Montego, and that was Jack Madruga's baby. That car was just, he kept it in perfect condition. He wouldn't let anyone else drive it. Occasionally, he would let a family member drive it, but he would never let a friend drive it. Gary Mathias had a driver's license, but Gary would never drive that car. Jack would not let anyone touch it but him. He'd be the only one allowed to drive it. So Jack picks up all the guys. I think Gary's the last to be picked up. They stop at a Miko service station, which was owned by Bill. Well, it was run by Bill Sterling's parents. He was one of the five guys. And they topped off the car with gas. And Bill Sterling got his weekly allowance of $15. And they headed off on their trip about an hour's north from Yuba City to Chico, California to go watch their favorite team play. So they get up there without incident. They watch their team, the UC Davis Aggies, win and beat Chico State. So they're in a really good mood. A guy that wrote for the local newspaper in Chico remembered seeing the guys there. So they're in high spirits. They leave the game in Jack's Montego. They all load up and they go just a couple blocks over to a place called Bears Market. And they got snacks for their hour drive south back home. They got, some Pepsi Colas, a jug of milk, just some different things to eat on their trip home. And the lady working the store that night remembers they came in right before her closing time. And she remembers kind of being mad at them because it was going to take her a little longer to close the store that night. So she definitely remembered them coming in, and they were in good, real high spirits, all five of them coming into her store. So they get their snacks, get back into Jack's Mercury Montego, and they're never seen again. That was the last time anyone saw all of these guys that we know of for sure. That was the last confirmed proven sighting of all 5 of the guys. And so they sometime during that night, still February 24th, going into the early morning of February 25th, which is now a Saturday morning. It's 1 o'clock in the morning, and I think it was Jack Madruga's mother wakes up and noticed that he's not in his bedroom, and she says, "This isn't right. These guys should have been home at least just hours ago." So she winds up calling another one of the mothers, and they said, "Hey, did Bill come home? Did Jackie come home?" And so they're all talking now, and they said, "No, they're not here," and they're getting extremely worried at this point. And they knew something was definitely wrong when 8 o'clock in the morning rolled around, and they were all supposed to meet up to go play in their Special Olympics game. That something was extremely wrong, that they would miss that game. And it was totally out of character for all of these guys, definitely 4 out of the 5 to not come home. I mean, they lived at home. They didn't travel very far usually. So this was highly out of character. So at that point, the police were called in, and a search was started to go find these guys where they were. They knew there was something wrong. And next couple of days, that Saturday, nothing's found. And then the following Monday, they put out, all the surrounding police departments are on the lookout for these guys, and specifically Jack Madruga's turquoise 1969 Mercury Montego. Well, the car is located that following Monday, way up a mountain road near the inside the Plumas National Forest. The car's just left abandoned at a place called the Rogers Cow Camp. It's just left at the side of the road. And so they call it in and they say, "Yeah, we found the car." So obviously they assumed that the guys can't be too far away from the car, but this is at an elevation of 5,000 feet. That car should not have been anywhere near there. It was completely off course from leaving Chico. They should have just gone, pretty much due south. And this was about an hour and a half away from Chico. It was going more to the northeast, and definitely not where they were intending to go whatsoever.
Drew, so while you was talking, it crossed my mind because some of the pieces of the puzzle, at least a puzzle, I don't know if it's the right puzzle, but some of the pieces of a puzzle is coming together to me. Matthias had, from some of the research I was doing earlier today, he had a friend in Forbestown, which
Correct.
wasn't too far from where they, discovered the car and stuff. I mean, it was kind of in that same general direction. Do you think in their high spirits, because you had mentioned, that he had drug problems in the past. Do you think in their high spirits, he may have been like, "Hey, you guys want to go celebrate with some stuff that my friend might have?" Or I don't know what the state of his friend is, but do you think there might have been drugs involved with the celebration?
I've heard that kicked around a little bit. I highly doubt it. I highly doubt it because, at the time Gary was on his medication. He was doing well on it. He was a success story on his medication. Oh, wow. And Gary was just as excited and playing in that game that was coming that next morning than any of the other 4. I mean, probably maybe even more in some instances. He loved it. The friends in Forbestown, they were finally contacted, and they said they hadn't heard from Gary in over a year. Oh, so wow. It would have been really odd just to pick that night, not even talking to these guys in a year, just to say, "Hey, we're up here." Because it really wasn't that far altogether from where Gary lived anyway to go see that, the friends at Forbestown. So I don't think that's what happened. I really don't. It's been speculated a lot because when they, to the turn you have to make when they were coming from Chico to get to Forbestown is really difficult to make and easy to miss. So some speculate maybe they were heading to Forbestown, missed that kind of a hairpin turn to make it to Forbestown, and they just kept going up into the mountains. That's speculated on pretty highly. But knowing as much about this case as I do, I can tell you that Jack Madruga would have absolutely known that he was lost, and he would have turned his car around. I know that for a fact. I know his cousin really well, and he just said that's not something that he would do. I mean, he had enough sense about him to turn the car around. So like I said, the car's abandoned at a place called Rogers Cow Camp at about an elevation of 5,000 feet. The guys are all wearing street clothes. They're wearing low top shoes. None of them brought a jacket that night because they didn't expect to be up at that kind of elevation. And I mean, it's freezing at this point. They were at least, 400 feet into the snow line on this one road where the car was found abandoned. It made no sense at all. So Guys don't show up for the game the next day. The search is on. They search around the car for about 2 or 3 days pretty heavily, but there's a blizzard coming in, heavy snow falling, and eventually they come in with snowmobiles. They're looking for the guys in that general area. They don't turn up a thing. Dogs, tracking dogs, nothing. The weather gets so bad up there at that time of year with the blizzard, they had to literally call off the search for an indefinite period of time, which was terrible. These people want to know where their loved ones are. Don't know where they are. They called in psychics. They called in a psychic, and she has this vision of a house where the guys might be. And one of the sheriffs, Jack Beecham, that was out of Yuba County, was driving around all over the place looking for this house this psychic saw in her vision. And he thought he found the house, and it didn't turn out to be anything. It was a total dead end lead. And I can tell you that Jack Madruga's niece, they had heard that Gary Mathias had friends in Forbstown. So Forbstown was a weird place. There was a lot of people would go to Forbstown that were kind of living off the grid. A lot of guys would go up there. They were either growing marijuana or just doing drugs, or like these commune hippie types that just didn't want to live around the rest of society. And that's what Forbstown was kind of known for. So she got it in her head and got with her brother and another friend of hers and drove, all around Forbstown looking for her cousin. Her Doc is what they called Jack Madruga. That was his nickname to the family. He was called Doc, and they're like, I got to find Doc. And she wound up finding a house, deep in the woods outside of Forbstown. She saw a baby stroller, and that'll kind of come into play later in the story. And she was just convinced that these guys were being held against their will at maybe the house that she had found, but the people came out with guns and kind of ran them off, probably because of drug activity, illegal activity. But long story short, nothing is found of the guys whatsoever in a long time until June 4th. Now remember, the guys went missing on February 24th. Nothing happens until June 4th of that same year. So we're talking over 3 months now. A group of motorcycle riders are riding through the Plumas National Forest and decide to take a short break, and they come to a place called the Daniel Zink Campground. And they get out, and they're it's a U.S. Forest Service trailer campsite for when there's wildfires. And this particular one wasn't manned. A lot of them are manned, but this one wasn't. It was very remote. And one of the motorcycle riders gets off his motorcycle and takes off his helmet. He's immediately hit with this putrid smell, and he's like, "This is odd. There must be a dead animal near here. Let's see if we can find it." He just can't get over the smell, and he notices that the smell is emanating from this one larger U.S. Forest Service trailer. So he walks up the stairs and peeks through a window, and he sees a dead body laying on a bed. Well, the dead body turns out to be Ted Weir. And the guy eventually gets into the trailer, calls the police in. The police show up to this Forest Service trailer, and they do identify the body as Ted Weir. He's laying on his back. He's missing 5 of his toes due to frostbite. He's got gangrene on his legs. He's lost from 80 to 100 pounds. And they speculate that he was alive for at least six to 8 weeks in that trailer. They find about 18 or so food rations. They were the military type C ration type food, and there's the cans are scattered about. And there was a broken window to the trailer. That's how they surmised that Ted Weir got in this trailer after the guys got lost. But there's no sign of any of the other boys. It's only Ted there in the trailer. No sign of anything. And this is where all the weirdness starts with this story. There was no attempt to start a fire, despite it being freezing. There was paperback books in the trailer. There was wooden furniture in the trailer. There was matches in the trailer, and no one had attempted to start a fire. And Ted was the kind of guy that probably couldn't have done that, but the other boys certainly could have. Certainly Gary Mathias could have. And next in the bed to Ted Weir, they found one of his gold rings was there, bracelet that he wore, and then there was a gold Waltham watch there that was missing its crystal that did not belong to any of the boys. Another item that was found near the bed of Ted Weir. Ted Weir's shoes were missing. Of course, he had terrible frostbite, and so he wouldn't have been able to wear his shoes anymore. But his shoes were missing, and they did find Gary Mathias's tennis shoes under the bed that Ted was laying on. So they speculate that maybe Gary switched shoes with Ted and kind of headed out on his own because Ted had, sturdier leather shoes. Gary had smaller feet than Ted, so they think that they just switched shoes with Ted and left his there and walked out into the cold. So now that they found Ted, they know kind of where to look. So they start, quickly searching that immediate area around the Forest Service trailer. And the next day, they find the bodies of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling not far from each other, about 2.5 miles from the Forest Service trailer. Their bodies had been ravaged by animals. It was really, really gruesome, just scattered remains, but they were able to identify them. They found the next day they found Jackie Hewitt's body. He was actually found by his brother-in-law, found his body, and his father was there as well. And his father picked up his jacket, and his spine literally fell out of his jacket. It's really tragic. I know when Bill Sterling's body was found, one of the sheriffs found Bill Sterling's body, and Bill Sterling's father was there as well, which they tried to advise the parents not to come on the search because they knew something like this might happen. It would be just so traumatic. And the guy shouted out to Bill Sterling's father. He said, "I think we found him, sir." And he goes, "How do you know?" And he goes, "Well, we found the wallet, which had a picture of Bill Sterling's twin sisters in it, his social security card." So that's how they immediately knew that was the body of Bill Sterling. So his father immediately fell to the ground, sobbing uncontrollably. A friend of his was there to comfort him. Really sad, really tragic. So now we already found Ted. Now we found the other 3 guys. So 4 of them are deceased. There's no sign of Gary Mathias anywhere. Gary has never been found to this day. Gary Mathias's remains have never been found to this day. And that's kind of the whole story there. What happened? Why did these guys ever start a fire? Why didn't they eat more of the food? They found out later that there was a neighboring, right next to the main Forest Service trailer, there was another one that had enough food for all 5 of those guys could have lived eating that food for a year. There was a propane tank that could have provided heat to the trailer that no one found. And like I said, no one ever even bothered to start a simple fire, which Gary Mathias would have known how to do. He'd been in the military. He would have been able to do that. And he was on his medication at the time. So if he makes it to that trailer that night, he would have known to at least start a fire, but no fire was ever started. So that's just one of the perplexing things about this case. Why no fire? Why didn't they get more of the food out? They know that at least 1 or 2 of the C rations were opened with what they call a P38 can opener, and only Jack Madruga or Gary Mathias would have known how to use those because they were both in the military. So that's kind of where the case sits today. Gary's still missing, and it's all just speculation on what may have happened to these guys.
Gary Mathias. And I think he's pretty interesting in this case, right? Because as you noted, most of the people, not most of them, all 5 of these men had some type of disability, some type of mental handicap of some kind. But Gary Mathias did not have any type of intellectual handicap or disability. He had schizophrenia, but the other 4 individuals, they had more, I guess, intellectual, if you could say, type disabilities, mental disorders, whatever you like to call it. And I noted that when researching this, because, for example, during my research, like the vehicle he was driving, right, because I believe he was the only one that could drive that vehicle, got stuck in the snow, right? And it was noted that they could have easily pushed that vehicle out of that snowbank and got unstuck and continued driving. And Gary Mathias, I feel like, would have noted that, being the fact that, like I said, he didn't suffer from any intellectual type disabilities or anything like that. It seems like all the weird stuff that's going on here, like not properly looking around the area to find that there's plenty of rations for everybody, not using the propane tank, not doing all these things, right? That you feel like someone who has that intellectual capacity could make those decisions to save the rest of the group. So why do you think that is? Why do you think that, Gary Mathias, though he's involved with this whole situation, is not preventing these things from occurring and not, protecting the rest of the group?
Yeah, that's a big part of it. And there's things that lead to the fact that Gary Mathias made it to that trailer. So like I mentioned, his shoes were found there. His family verified those were his shoes. And it's really strange, but there's also things that point away that Gary never made it to the trailer, like the fact that a fire was never started, that more food wasn't eaten. Someone was taking care of Ted Weir. They said there was no way he could have taken care of himself because he would have been in so much pain from the, the condition his feet were in. So somebody must have been caring for him. The police speculate that Gary Mathias made it to that trailer. Obviously, we know Ted Weir made it to the trailer because he was found there, and Jackie Hewitt. They think that Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling died of hypothermia on their walk from where the car was abandoned to the Forest Service trailer. And another thing you see all over every time you read about this case in newspapers or other accounts that retell it, they say that the distance from where the car was found, where the car was abandoned to where the Forest Service trailer was 19 miles. Well, as the crow flies, it's a lot shorter. It would be about 5.4 miles. And, the guys probably wouldn't have taken that long winding road. They probably would have done a more direct route, but it still would have been about 9 miles, I think, 9 to 11 miles on foot. And remember, they're going uphill where the car was abandoned to where the forest trailer was. They're going uphill. And that's totally unnatural for anybody to do that. When you're lost like that, even if you abandon the car, it's almost everyone's natural inclination to go back downhill. The weather is going to get better. You're getting at a lower elevation. There was some a lodge not too far back down that road if they had gone that direction. So all the family surmised that something scared them and frightened them to go up that mountain because nothing else could have done it. These are 5 grown guys. Like you said, Gary would have known, and Jack Madruga would have known to push that car out of that snow. It was stuck, but it wasn't stuck that bad. And the car had a quarter of a tank of gas left in it, and it was in perfect running condition. When the police found it, they actually hot-wired it, drove it back to Oroville, California, which was the nearest bigger town. So the car was in perfect running condition. They could have pushed it out. Makes no sense. And then, like you said, Gary Mathias would have absolutely known. He could have protected him. He wasn't a guy to get scared real easy. He would defend a lot of those guys in fights. Gary was, he was a brawler. He'd been in a lot of barroom fights and stuff like that. So he definitely had perfect sense about him when he was on his meds, and he was that night. So why were all these terrible decisions made? How did they wind up going up the mountain into 6-foot snow drifts wearing street clothes? That's what makes the case so fascinating, is how it all plays out. So when you get more into the different theories and what the families believe, you get a lot deeper into how Gary comes into play with all of it.
Drew, I wanted to ask you, because I know you kind of mentioned this, because now we're kind of sort of getting into the theories a little bit of, did someone or something or whatever chase them up this mountain and force them to make these kind of decisions that doesn't really make sense, and force them to kind of run into the forest or whatever and ditch their vehicle, all these different weird things. So you'll have to remind me the name, right? Because I know you're the expert on this case and I'm horrible with names. But when reading about this, I found out about this eyewitness, right?
Yep.
And apparently he got stuck in the snow and he went out to push his vehicle, had a heart attack, went back into his vehicle. And then he claims he saw the Yuba County 5. He saw the 5 young men, but he also claims he saw a woman and a baby and heard the baby crying, and they had flashlights, and he kept calling out to them, but they kept ignoring him. Just a weird scenario here.
Very weird.
What do you make of that?
Well, that ties into a lot of things in this story, and it's like with this story, the more you know, the more you don't know. It's the more information you get, the more perplexing it becomes. Such was the case with this sighting. Now, this sighting came up. We don't even know exactly when this sighting came up. It was from a man named Joe Shones, and it came up probably about a week or two after the boys initially went missing. He read about the boys being missing in the newspaper, heard about it on the news, something like that, and he came forward with this story. And his story was that he was driving his VW Bug up that same mountain road on that very evening of Friday, February 24th, 1978. He was going up there because he had a little ski cabin, and he was going to check the snow line and stuff like that, and just checking out the snow for an upcoming ski weekend that he was going to take his wife and daughter on. So he's up in that area for that reason, at least according to him. And while he's up there, he gets stuck in the snow in his little VW Bug, and he gets out of his car. And this is sometime on that Friday night. It's I think earlier that evening. Probably the boys were still at the basketball game at this point. But anyway, Joe Shones' car gets stuck, and he gets out to get it unstuck. And in the process, he suffers a mild heart attack, and that's how he described it. So he's feeling these heart attack symptoms. So he gets back into his VW Bug. just to run the heat, and he just sits there trying to recover because he's having all these pains shooting through him from this mild heart attack that he's having. So at some point he either dozes off or he's kind of delirious from this mild heart attack. And sometime where he estimates around midnight that night, he's woken up by what's he describes as whistling sounds, and he hears this whistling, and he's out there in the freezing cold, the engine's still running, trying to keep him warm, and he gets out of his car to hear where, find out where this whistling's coming from, and then he notices these two headlights come up, a pair of headlights comes up behind his car, so he knows that somebody's there. So they stop. I don't know what the exact distance is, but at least a few car lengths from behind him, and he notices people get out of the car, and he thinks it looks like maybe 5 men and like you mentioned, a woman and a baby. And he immediately cries out for help. He said, help me, I've had a heart attack. Please come help me. He's standing outside of his car at this point. It's freezing cold, and he's sure they can hear him. And he says that they all just kind of stand there. No one's coming to help him. And a few moments pass, and then suddenly the headlights of the car behind him just go out, and the figures disappear, and they're gone. And he remembers thinking, he getting angry, like, how could these people not come help me? They were standing right there, and I'm in distress. They wouldn't help me. So he's just kind of puzzled by this. So he gets back into his car for the heat. He's still, kind of delirious from having this mild heart attack. And what he estimates would have been another 3 hours from them, sometime around 3 a.m. He sees headlights coming up behind him again. And he gets out of his car and starts calling for help, and then he sees what he called like figures getting out of this car, and he sees flashlight beams, and they're searching for something. So he's calling out for help again. Help me, I've had a heart attack, this thing again. And again, no one comes to his aid. He remembers getting angry, and then all of a sudden all the flashlights are turned off, and there's no lights on that car behind him anymore, and he can't hear anything either, so they're just gone. And he can't believe it. He doesn't know if it's the same group he saw earlier, but either way, they didn't come for his aid. So he gets back into his car for like another hour or so. I don't remember how long. And the gas in his car finally runs out. So there's no more heat. So he, according to his own story, he walks back down that same road to a place called the Mountain House Lodge, where he had stopped on the way up there to get a drink. And he walks on that walk back. He recalls seeing Jack Madruga's Mercury Montego, and he looked in the window. Nobody's inside the car. He recalls that the window was partially cracked, and he walked back to the Mountain House, where he says he then was taken to. There's two different versions of the story, which was interesting about this guy Joe Shones. His story keeps changing, but he said that he made it to the Mountain House, and they took him to the hospital in Oroville, California, where it was later confirmed that he did indeed suffer a mild heart attack. Another version of his story is that they took him back home, and then his wife took him to the hospital. So there's all these little discrepancies in his story. And then there was another sighting that turned up after Joe Shones, where a woman said she saw the boys, and this is obviously still during the time before they find Ted's body, when they're missing. But she said that she saw all 5 of the boys in a place called Brownsville, California. Well, that was interesting because Brownsville is literally right outside of Forbstown. I mean, they're literally right next to each other. So that gave that story a little credibility back to the story of Gary Mathias having friends in Forbstown. So she said she had saw a reward poster for the boys and remembers seeing them at a convenience store. 2 of them were using a payphone, and another was sitting in a red pickup truck. And another 2 of them were inside the store buying something. And after that story turned up, the family's thought just didn't sound like the guys. Like, why would they be traveling in any other car other than Jack's Mercury Montego? Why would they be in this red Chevy Stepside, as they described it? And after that story came out, Joe Shones amended his story again of seeing the boys that night, saying that on the second sighting that he indeed saw a truck as well as a car that came up behind him. So his story's kind of all over the place, but the only thing that was confirmed to be true was that he did suffer a mild heart attack, but it couldn't be pinned down to that exact date. This is important because, I feel in my own personal theory, and I don't sell it too hard, I think Joe Shones was probably responsible for the boys being missing personally, mainly because he doesn't always tell the truth. I interviewed someone heavily that knew the man. He was a constant liar. He was, kind of the town drunk. He was a really kind of mean guy. And, at the very least, he could have sent them in the wrong direction just for the fun of it. So that's why I really think he does play into the story, but in a bad way.
Oh, wow. I was about to ask about the red truck and the woman. I know a woman had reported seeing him in a red truck, and then he had mentioned seeing, two pairs of headlights and a woman with the boys. I was going to ask, if you thought maybe the woman had anything to do with their disappearance, but I'd never heard that theory that he was responsible.
Yeah, because that's mine. That's one of mine, and I don't sell it too hard. It is in the book, but from what I found out about Joe Shones, he's just it's just kind of a rough guy. No one ever really understood what he did for a living. He told the guy that I met that lived next door to him for 2 years that, when he asked him, he said, "What do you do for a living?" Because the guy was never really working, and he did have a wife. He had a daughter at the time. And interesting enough, Joe Shones' daughter had intellectual disabilities, and she was 18 years old at the time. So I thought that was a really weird coincidence. Maybe these guys ran across each other in Sacramento, because the boys used to go to dances for the handicap when people with learning disabilities. Was Joe Shones' daughter at one of these dances? And I kind of just throw that out there as a possibility, because she did suffer from intellectual disabilities just like 4 of the boys did. And I just thought that was a stunning coincidence when I learned that. And so maybe they did. Maybe they ran into him before. Maybe they saw him at the game in Chico. Anything's possible, but it could have just been the bad luck of the boys driving by Joe Shones' car that was broken, that was stuck in the snow, because as I was told by the guy that knew him, that lived next door to him, his car was constantly getting stuck up there on that road for whatever reason. And people would get him unstuck and he wouldn't even say thank you. He would just take off. He was just that kind of guy. He wouldn't even wave at you or thank you for doing it. He was the town drunk. He was probably drunk, maybe, I don't know, like 300 days out of the year. He loved telling stories. He loved telling, the really wild stories, like, him being in the military, which he was never even in the military, just stuff about jumping out of planes and stuff that, the guys in the military would say, that's not true. And the guy would just double down on it. Oh, yeah, it is, this kind of thing. So he's really an unreliable witness altogether. And he's also, what makes this even more complicated is a guy like Joe Shones could have just made this whole thing up about seeing him that night just to interject himself. We don't know. But I kind of lean towards maybe the guys just saw him stuck, and maybe he just said, "Hey, thanks for getting me unstuck, but I'm having a heart attack. Can you go up that mountain? My wife's just up that road." And maybe that's what sent him up that mountain going uphill. And another thing that even the police speculated on was that the snowcat came up, one of those little machines that will clear a path in the snow. They called snowcats. Had come up to that very Forest Service trailer that they wound up at. I think it was just a few days before they went missing, and they cleared a path up to that trailer to get the snow off the roof of it so it wouldn't collapse. So they think the boys may have found the trail left by the snowcat and thought this must lead somewhere. So it was kind of like the around the corner syndrome, where they thought surely this leads somewhere, and they just kept going and going and going until they couldn't take it anymore. And then 2 of them succumbed to hypothermia, being Madruga and Sterling, and then the other 3 guys make it to the trailer. And maybe at some point Jackie Hewitt makes his way out of there, and Gary Mathias stays there to take care of Ted Weir. And then eventually Ted dies. Gary puts on Ted's shoes and heads out into the night. But anyway, going back to Shones, I don't know. It's a really interesting thing because he's not a reliable witness. Like I said, his daughter has intellectual disabilities. She was 18 at the time. Maybe that ties into how these guys knew each other. I don't know. I only speculate, but that's one theory, that they just ran into Joe Shones and he sent him in the wrong direction, or he fired a gun and scared him up the hill. That's just one of the main theories that are out there, and the little less known one.
Yeah, that's extremely interesting. Kind of like what Hayden said. I've never heard of that theory, but I mean, it makes sense. Considering like you brought up earlier, his kind of reputation in that area and how people perceived him and what he did. So with that being said, right, I think that's a good way to lead on to our final question. For me personally, when I look at this case, I really do think that this was just a series of really unfortunate events, due to the fact of, their mental condition, their mental state for many of them, and how they weren't able to I guess, properly handled the situation they were put in, and unfortunately were pushed out into the forest due to the weather conditions or whatever it was, their vehicle getting stuck. And then, next thing you know, they're unfortunately they're passing away due to weather conditions, hypothermia, all that. But what do you think, Drew? I know you kind of just brought up that theory. In general, do you think foul play was more than likely involved here, or do you think it's more than likely kind of the theory that I just brought up? I mean, what do you think at the end of the day happened here with the Yuba County Five?
I kind of lean towards what you were just talking about. I think it was just a kind of just errors leading to other errors. I do think something drove him up that mountain. I know Jack Madruga for a fact would have known how to just turn his car around. He would have. He wasn't that bad off, and he babied that car. One of the interesting things they found was there was no damage to the underside of that car. Even going up that rutted mountain road, there was no damage. But that leads me to believe, knowing how Jack would drive that car, even when he went down a rough road like that, he would go so slow as to not screw up even the underbody of his car. His cousin told me that. That leads me to believe Jack drove his own car up that mountain, for maybe under duress. But that leads me to believe that he did. He would have known that they didn't need to be up that mountain. Something was compelling them to go up that mountain, either alien or UFO or somebody else riding with him with a gun to him, something like that. I really do believe, I come in hard on that belief that Jack drove his own car up that road. I can tell you one other real quick thing that the families believe, or at least two of them for sure, think that what happened was that Gary Mathias was targeted by somebody he knew really well. We'll just call him the town bully. They think that they knew they were going to the game in Chico that night, and they ran into the boys somewhere either after the game or on the way home, and they stopped over the dam at the Oroville. There was a dam in Oroville, California, not very, very far from where the car was found, and that an altercation ensued with this bad bully guy and a couple of his other friends. Got into a fight, and they were picking on Jackie Hewitt that would make these really weird wailing sounds because Jackie had such a low IQ. He would just kind of make this kind of like really weird sound when he was in distress, and that Gary got upset with that and jumped in and started fighting these guys. And the one guy that really didn't like Gary wound up throwing Gary over the bridge at the Oroville Dam and killing, obviously Gary's over the bridge. He's dead, never to be found again. And I can tell you, two of the families, and this rumor in Yuba City, Yuba County area, is very prevalent. The fact that they believe that Gary was thrown over the dam, and that the other guys were driven by somebody else up that road, and then just run up into the mountains just to get rid of the rest of them, and not, hopefully died or just don't remember what they did to Gary. But that doesn't explain how Gary's shoes were found in the trailer. Did one of the other boys take them, thinking Gary was going to return? There's some anomaly like that would explain it. All I can tell you is that belief that Gary was thrown over the Oroville Dam is I can tell you, Jackie Hewitt's family believes that 100%. They don't even believe it 99%. They believe it 100%. Gary Mathias' sister, he had two sisters. One committed suicide years ago, but one's still alive. Her name's Tammy, and I know her very well. She's kind of on the bubble. She believes that Gary made it to the trailer, but she also thinks this guy had it in for him. So she's kind of split herself on what happened. But that's just one of the theories out there, that Gary was killed, thrown over the bridge, and the other guys were driven up that road just to get rid of him.
All in all, no matter what happened, whether it was, foul play or aliens or Yeti or whatever, it's a very tragic story. Very, very tragic story. And I mean, it sounds like something that would be made into a movie.
Absolutely. It would make a fantastic movie.
Which, studying this case, and of course I'm a filmmaker, Coleman, does filmmaking and stuff with me. If I ever got the chance to portray this story, I'd want to portray it as reverently as possible, in respect to the family.
Absolutely. If you read the book, if you ever get a chance to, and I'll send you guys one, just give me your addresses. I'll send you one. You can tell I wrote the book really about the tragedy of it all. So I really tried to give so much background information on the boys themselves. Jack Madruga loved I Love Lucy. He loved Motown music. Jackie Hewitt loved playing with his beagle named Bo. I really wanted to find these personal stories and humanize these guys. To really hone in on the loss. So, Gary did some bad stuff in his past, but his sister still misses him to this day terribly. His family missed him so bad at the time. His mother, his stepfather, his other sister. He had a lot of mental problems. I'm not excusing what he did, but Gary's missed too. The whole thing is tragic. A lot of other tragedies happened to these people, specifically Bill Sterling. Father got killed in a boating accident. His other brother was killed a year later after he was found dead in a motorcycle wreck. Just horrible, horrible tragedies happen to these people, even outside of this particular tragedy. So I focus on that a lot, just the reverence and just the awful loss here.
Well, if we ever get the chance to, tell these people's story, we'll definitely invite you on set and stuff and have you advise us if you want to. And thank you for sending us your book. We really appreciate that. How, what's it called, and, where should we send people to check out your book? What, Amazon? You got a website?
Yeah, Amazon. It's on. I have a website, but the book is on Amazon. Website is drewbeesonbooks.com, and on Amazon you could look up, it's called Out of Bounds: What Happened to the Yuba County Five, and it's in paperback and Kindle. And all my stuff can be found on the website or my YouTube channel, of course. And of course, when I do my next video, I will put out a link for this one as well.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely put links down below. And thank you so much for everything.
Sure, man. Appreciate it, guys.
Yeah, so, obviously, before we head out, obviously, I just want to reiterate kind of what Hayden and Drew were just talking about. Obviously, we wish nothing best for the family of these victims, for the victims themselves. And obviously, making a video like this, it's obviously done in the hopes that, one day we can figure out what truly happened here and, keep interest alive. It's what I always say, is like keeping interest alive in like the Zodiac case. We do lots of videos on Zodiac because that's something, and I know Drew can attest to this. Drew has devoted Drew, you could say yourself, countless time to the Zodiac case and all the work you put into that. Anytime we talk about these true crime cases, it's not to, just sit there and talk about it for the sake of talking about it. It is interesting, but at the same time, we want to see these cases get solved. And the only way for that to happen,
families,
for the families, absolutely. Yeah, for the victims and for the families of the victims, for the friends, anyone who knew these people, we want to see them get justice, and we want to see their stories being told, and, having, the families having that closure to know what happened to them. So hopefully that can happen one day. Hopefully we can figure out, what happened to Matthias, correct, Drew? There's one.
Yep. Gary was never found.
Yeah.
He could be in a homeless camp somewhere. He could still be alive. A lot of people speculate he just maybe made it further off into the forest where he could never be found.
Right. Yeah. And we won't know, unfortunately, until that information somehow gets out there. So obviously, people watching this at home, please go look at Drew's work, go read his book. He deserves that at least. This man has done so much for all these different cases and putting in, like I said earlier, countless hours and hours and hours of research, not only on his books, but on his YouTube channel. So make sure you check out his YouTube channel as well. Subscribe, like his videos. Drew, thank you so much for joining us once again. It honestly means the world to us. I know I say that, I know it sounds corny, but it really does mean the world to us that you take your time out of your day to come and make videos with us and share your knowledge.
Enjoyed it, man. I like what you guys do. I like your channel, and
thank you.
I'm gonna really enjoy seeing it grow.
Thank you. We appreciate it.
Yeah, we really appreciate it. All right, everyone, go subscribe, like, comment to Drew's YouTube channel. Go buy his books, right? Read up, study up. Like I said, keep interest alive in these cases so we can get justice and, vindication for these families and for the victims. And obviously, if you're watching this and you like what we do, subscribe, like, comment, all that good stuff. Let us know what you'd like to see, what other cases you want to see us cover. My name is Coleman.
My name is Hayden.
See you guys next time. Peace out.
Peace.